Dr. No by Ian Fleming. In London, March came in like a rattlesnake. From the first light on March the 1st, hail and icy sleet lashed at the city and went on lashing as the people streamed miserably to work, their legs whipped by the wet hems of their mackintoshes and their faces blotching with the cold. When the old black silver Wraith Rolls with the nondescript number plate stopped outside the tall building in Regent's Park, M climbed stiffly out onto the pavement, and the hail hit him in the face like a whiff of small shot. M entered the building, went up the lift to the 8th floor, and along the thick carpeted corridor to his office. He shut the door behind him, took off his overcoat and scarf and hung them behind the door. He went over to the desk and sat down and bent towards the intercom. He pressed a switch. "I'm in, Miss Moneypenny. Tell 007 to come and see me, please. And let me have the Strangways file." He sat back and reached for his pipe and began filling it thoughtfully. Miss Moneypenny brought in the file and left silently. M pulled over the file and went quickly through it. The intercom winked. 007's here, sir." "Send him in, Moneypenny." When James Bond came through the door, M's eyes were very bright and watchful. He walked over to the chair across the desk from M and sat down. "Morning, 007. "Good morning, sir." It was all just as Bond had remembered it through the months of being shunted from hospital to hospital, the weeks of dreary convalescence. Sitting here in this room opposite M was the symbol of normality he had longed for. He looked across the smoke clouds from M's pipe into the shrewd grey eyes. They were watching him. What was coming? "How do you feel? Glad to be back?" "Very glad, sir, and I feel fine." "Any final thoughts about your last case?" M's voice was businesslike, cold. Bond didn't like it. Something unpleasant was coming. He said, "No, sir, it was a mess. I blame myself for letting that woman get me. Shouldn't have happened." M took his hands from behind his neck and slowly leant forward and placed them flat on the desk in front of him. His eyes were hard. "Just so." The voice was velvet, dangerous. "Your gun got stuck, if I recall. This Beretta of yours with the silencer. Something wrong there, 007. Can't afford that sort of mistake if you're to carry a 00 number. Would you prefer to drop it and go back to normal duties?" Bond stiffened. His eyes looked resentfully into M's. The license to kill for the Secret Service, the 00 prefix, was a great honor. It had been earned hardly. It brought Bond the only assignments he enjoyed, the dangerous ones. "No, I wouldn't, sir." "Now, I've got some more news for you. There's a job come up. In Jamaica. Personnel problem, or that's what it looks like. Routine investigation and report. The sunshine'll do you good, and you can practice your new guns on the turtles or whatever they have down there. You could do with a bit of a holiday. Like to take it on?" Bond thought, he's got it in for me over the last job. Feels I let him down. Won't trust me with anything tough. Wants to see. "Oh, well," he said. "Sounds rather like the soft life, sir. I've had almost too much of that lately, but if it's got to be done—" "If you say so, sir." "Yes," said M. "I say so." M reached over and switched on the green-shaded desk light and pulled the file towards him. Bond noticed it for the first time. He read the reversed lettering without difficulty. What had his colleague John Strangway been up to? Who was Trueblood? M pressed a button on his desk. "I'll get the Chief of Staff in on this," he said. "I know the bones of the case, but he can fill in the flesh. It's a drab little story, I'm afraid." The Chief of Staff came in. He was a man of about Bond's age. He was Bond's best friend at headquarters. They smiled at each other. "Bring up a chair, Chief of Staff. I've given 007 the Strangways case. I think you knew Strangways, 007. What did you think of him?" "Good man, sir. Bit highly strung. I'd have thought he'd have been relieved by now. 5 years is a long time in the tropics." M ignored the comment. "And his number 2, this girl Mary Trueblood. Good looker, to judge by the photographs. Ever come across her, Bond?" "No, sir. What's happened to them?" "That's what we want to find out," said M. "They've gone. Vanished into thin air. Both went on the same evening about 3 weeks ago. Left Strangway's bungalow in Kingston burned to the ground. Radio, codebooks, files. Nothing left but a few charred scraps. The girl left all her things intact. Must have taken only what she stood up in. Even her passport was in her room. But it would have been easy for Strangways to cook up 2 passports. He had plenty of blanks. He was passport control officer for the island. Airport security doesn't amount to much in that part of the world. Isn't that so, Chief of Staff? Yes, sir. The Chief of Staff sounded dubious. But I still can't understand that last radio contact. Someone, radio security thinks it was the girl, acknowledged our signal and then went suddenly off the air. We tried to regain contact, but there was obviously something fishy, and we broke off. The governor jumped to the obvious conclusions. So, of course, did the local police. M turned to Bond. On what you've heard, what do you think, 007? There's not much else to tell you. Bond was definite. I just can't see Strangways flying off the handle like that, sir. I dare say he was having an affair with the girl, but the service was his whole life. He'd never have let it down. Well, perhaps you can suggest another solution, 007. Bond answered with another question. Well, what was the last case Strangways was working on? Had he reported anything, or was there anything Section 3 had asked him to look into? Anything at all in the last few months? Nothing whatsoever. M was definite. He took the pipe out of his mouth and cocked it at the Chief of Staff. Right? Right, sir, said the Chief of Staff. Only that damn business about the birds. It was some people in America, called the Audubon Society. They protect rare birds from extinction, or something like that. Got onto our ambassador in Washington, and the FO passed the buck to the Colonial Office. They shoved it onto us. Seems these bird people are pretty powerful in America. M waved his pipe impatiently. He picked up the Strangways file and tossed it down in front of the Chief of Staff. The Chief of Staff took the file and riffled through the pages towards the back. He found what he wanted and bent the file in half. There was silence in the room while he ran his eye over 3 pages of typescript. Then he slapped the file shut. He said, Well, this is a story as we pass it on to Strangways on January the 20th. He acknowledged receipt, but after that we heard nothing from him. It seems there's a bird called a roseate spoonbill. Looks like a sort of pink stork with an ugly flat bill which it uses for digging for food in the mud. Not many years ago, these birds were dying out. Then somebody reported a colony of them on an island called Crab Key between Jamaica and Cuba. It's British territory, a dependency of Jamaica. When the birds were found there, it had been uninhabited for about 50 years. The Audubon people went there and ended up by leasing a corner as a sanctuary, put 2 wardens in charge and persuaded the airlines to stop flying over the island and disturbing the birds. Then the price of guano went up, and some bright chap had the idea of buying the island and starting to work it again. Who is this man? Chinaman, or rather half Chinese and half German. Got a daft name. Calls himself Dr. No. Dr. Julius No. No. Spelt like yes. That's right. Any facts about him? Nothing except that he keeps very much to himself. Hasn't been seen since he made his deal with the Jamaican government. Well, nothing happened until just before Christmas, when one of the Audubon wardens arrived on the north shore of Jamaica in a canoe. He was in a terrible state, badly burned, died in a few days. He told some crazy story about their camp having been attacked by a dragon with flames coming out of its mouth. The dragon had killed his pal and burned up the camp. Poor chap was obviously off his rocker. And that was that, except that a routine report had to be sent off to the Audubon Society, and they weren't satisfied. Sent down 2 of their big brass in a light aircraft from Miami to investigate. There's an airstrip on the island, but the plane crashed on landing and killed the 2 Audubon men. Well, that aroused these bird people to fury. They got the politicians involved. They all seem to have stacks of money. God knows where it comes from. M snorted. Anyway, you asked about Strangway's last case, and that's it. M leaned forward belligerently. Any questions? I've got a busy day ahead. Bond got to his feet. Perhaps if I could have the file, sir, he said placatingly. It just strikes me that 4 people seem to have died more or less because of these birds. Perhaps 2 more did, Strangways and the Trueblood girl. I agree it sounds ridiculous, but we've got nothing else to go on. Take it, said M impatiently, and hurry up and get your holiday over. You may not have noticed it, but the rest of the world happens to be in a bit of a mess. The sticky fingers of the Jamaican heat brushed Bond's face as he left the aircraft and walked over to Health and Immigration. Bond's passport described him as import and export merchant. "What company, sir?" "Universal Export." "Are you here on business or pleasure, sir?" "Pleasure." "I hope you enjoy your stay, sir." The Negro immigration officer handed Bond his passport with indifference. "Thank you." Bond walked out into the customs hall. At once he recognized a tall, brown-skinned man against the barrier. He was wearing the same old faded blue shirt and probably the same khaki twill trousers he'd been wearing when Bond first met him 5 years before. "Quarrel!" From behind the barrier, the Cayman Islander gave a broad grin. "How are you, Captain?" he called delightedly. "I'm fine," said Bond. "Just wait till I get my bag through. Got the car?" "Sure, Captain." The customs officer, who, like most men from the waterfront, knew Quarrel, chalked Bond's bag without opening it, and Bond picked it up and went out through the barrier. Quarrel took it from him and held out his right hand. "You haven't changed, Quarrel," Bond said affectionately. They were moving towards the exit when there came the sharp crack and flash of a press camera. A pretty Chinese girl in a Jamaican dress was lowering her speed graphic. She said with synthetic charm, "Thank you, gentlemen. I'm from the Daily Gleaner. Mr. Bond, isn't it? How long will you be with us this time, Mr. Bond?" Bond was offhand. This was a bad start. "In transit," he said shortly. "And what hotel will you be staying at?" Damn, thought Bond. He said, "Myrtle Bank," and moved on. "Thank you, Mr. Bond," said the tinkling voice. "I hope you'll enjoy our island." Bond was vaguely worried. There was no earthly reason why his picture should be wanted by the press. It was 5 years since his last adventures on the island, and anyway his name was always kept out of the papers. They got to the car. It was a black Sunbeam Alpine. Bond looked sharply at it, and then at the number plate. Strangway's car. What the hell? "Where did you get this, Quarrel?" "ADC tell me for to take him, Captain. Him say hit the only spare car they have." Bond got into the passenger seat. As they moved off down the long cactus-fringed road towards the distant lights of Kingston, he cursed his carelessness. He should have taken a taxi to his hotel and made contact with Quarrel later. Then he would have seen the car and had a chance to change it. As it was, reflected Bond, he might just as well have advertised his visit and its purpose in the Gleaner. That gave the enemy the first game. But was there an enemy? Wasn't he being overcautious? That evening, he and Quarrel ate at a local establishment called the Joy Boat. Only half the tables were filled, mostly by coloured people. There was a sprinkling of British and American sailors with their girls. An immensely fat Negro in a smart white dinner jacket left one of the tables and came to meet them. "Hi, Mr. Q. Long time no see. Nice table for two?" "That's right," said Quarrel happily. "Closer to the kitchen than the music." "Crab Key," said Bond. "What sort of a place is that?" Quarrel looked at him sharply. "That a bad luck place now, Captain," he said shortly. "Chinese German buy hit during the war, and bring in men and dig bird dirt. Don't let nobody land there, and don't let no one get off. We gives it a wide berth." "Why's that?" "Him have plenty watchmen, and guns, machine guns, and a radar, and a spotting plane. Friends of mine have landed there, and him never been seen again. That Chinese keep him island plenty private. Tell the truth, Captain." Quarrel was apologetic. "That Crab Key scare me plenty." Bond said thoughtfully, "Well, well." A glint of light caught the corner of Bond's eye. He turned quickly. The Chinese girl from the airport was standing in the nearby shadows. Now she was dressed in a tight-fitting sheath of black satin, slashed up one side almost to her hip. She had a Leica with a flash attachment in one hand. The other was in a leather case at her side. The hand came out holding a flashbulb. The girl slipped the base into her mouth to wet it and improve the contact, and made to screw it into the reflector. "Get that girl," said Bond quickly. In 2 strides Quarrel was up with her. He held out his hand. "Evening, missy," he said softly. The girl smiled. She let the Leica hang on the thin strap round her neck. She took Quarrel's hand. Quarrel swung her round like a ballet dancer. Now he had her hand behind her back, and she was in the crook of his arm. She looked up at him angrily. "Don't! You're hurting!" Quarrel smiled down into the flashing dark eyes in the pale, almond-shaped face. "Captain like you to take a drink with we," he said soothingly. He came back to the table, moving the girl along with him. He hooked a chair out with his foot and sat her down beside him, keeping the grip on her wrist behind her back. They sat bolt upright, like quarrelling lovers. Bond looked into the pretty, angry little face. "Good evening. What are you doing here? Why do you want another picture of me?" "I'm doing the night spots." The Cupid's bow of a mouth parted persuasively. "The first picture of you didn't come out. Tell this man to leave me alone." "So you work for the Gleaner. What's your name?" "I won't tell you." Bond cocked an eyebrow at Quarrel. Quarrel's eyes narrowed. His hand behind the girl's back turned slowly. The girl struggled like an eel, her teeth clenched on her lower lip. Quarrel went on twisting. Suddenly she said, "Ow!" sharply, and gasped, "I'll tell!" Quarrel eased his grip. The girl looked furiously at Bond. "Annabelle Chung!" "I'm sorry to have to exert pressure," said Bond, "but my export manager in London said Kingston was full of shady characters. I'm sure you're not one of them, but I really can't understand why you're so anxious to get my picture. Tell me why." "No," said the girl sullenly. "All right, Quarrel, go ahead." Bond sat back. Quarrel's right shoulder started to dip downwards. The girl squirmed towards him to ease the pressure, but he held her body away with his free hand. The girl's face strained towards Quarrel's. Suddenly she spat full in his eyes. Quarrel grinned and increased the twist. The girl's feet kicked wildly under the table. She hissed out words in Chinese. Sweat beaded on her forehead. "Tell," said Bond softly. "Tell, and it will stop, and we'll be friends and have a drink." He was getting worried. The girl's arm must be on the verge of breaking. "You!" Suddenly the girl's left hand flew up and into Quarrel's face. Bond was too slow to stop her. Something glinted and there was a sharp explosion. Bond snatched at her arm and dragged it back. Blood was streaming down Quarrel's cheek. Glass and metal tinkled onto the table. She had smashed the flashbulb on Quarrel's face. If she had been able to reach an eye, it would have been blinded. Quarrel's free hand went up and felt his cheek. He put it in front of his eyes and looked at the blood. "Aha!" There was nothing but admiration and a feline pleasure in his voice. He said equably to Bond, "We get nothing onto this girl, Captain. She plenty tough. You want for me to break she's arm?" "Good God, no." "Okay, Captain." Quarrel brought the girl's right arm from behind her back. He still held on to the wrist. Now he opened the girl's hand. He looked into her eyes. His own were cruel. "You mark me, missy. Now I mark you." He brought up his other hand and took the mound of Venus, the soft lozenge of flesh in the palm below her thumb, between his thumb and forefinger. He began to squeeze it. Bond could see his knuckles go white with the pressure. The girl gave a yelp. She hammered at Quarrel's hand and then at his face. Quarrel grinned and squeezed harder. Suddenly he let go. The girl shot to her feet and backed away from the table, her bruised hand in her mouth. She took her hand down and hissed furiously, "He'll get you, you bastards!" Then, her Leica dangling, she ran off through the trees. Quarrel laughed shortly. He took a napkin and wiped it down his cheek and threw it on the ground and took up another. He said to Bond, "She's love maun be sore long after my face don't get healed. That a fine piece of woman. The love maun. When him get fat like with that girl, you can tell her'll be good in bed. You know that, Captain?" "No," said Bond. "That's new to me." "Sure thing." Bond said, "Quarrel, it's time you married and settled down. It's 3 o'clock in the morning in London, where I was yesterday. I need a night's sleep. You've got to start getting me into training. I think I'm going to need it. And it's about time you put some plaster on that cheek of yours. She's written her name and address on it." Quarrel grunted reminiscently. He said with quiet pleasure, "That was some tough baby." He picked up a fork and clanged it against his glass. "He'll get you. He'll get you. He'll get you, you bastards." The words were still ringing in Bond's brain the next day as he sat on his balcony and ate a delicious breakfast and gazed out across the riot of tropical gardens to Kingston 5 miles below him. Now he was sure that Strangways and the girl had been killed. Someone had needed to stop them looking any further into his business, so he had killed them and destroyed the records of what they were investigating. The same person knew or suspected that the Secret Service were following up Strangway's disappearance, and that Bond had been given the job. Now, who was this enemy? Well, there was only one candidate, and a pretty insubstantial one at that. Dr. No, Dr. Julius No, the German Chinese, who owned Crab Key and made his money out of guano. Bond decided he would get hold of the Colonial Secretary and try and find out all about the damned stuff and about Crab Key and, if possible, about Dr. No. There was a double knock on the door. Bond got up and unlocked it. It was Quarrel, his left cheek decorated with a piratical cross of sticking plaster. "Morning, Captain. You said 8:30? "Yes, come on in, Quarrel. We've got a busy day." They sat down outside on the balcony. Bond offered Quarrel a cigarette and lit one himself. "Now then," he said, "what's happened to that house we had on the North Shore last time, Bow Desert at Morgan's Harbour? Do you know if it's let?" "Couldn't say, Captain. It's well away from the tourist places, and they're asking a big rent for it." "Well, go and see if you can rent it again for a month, or another bungalow nearby. I don't mind what you pay. Say it's for a rich American, Mr. James. Get the keys and pay the rent and say I'll write and confirm. I can telephone them if they want more details." Bond reached into his hip pocket and brought out a thick wad of notes. He handed half of it to Quarrel. "Here, that should cover all this. Get in touch if you want some more. You know where I'll be." "Thanks, Captain," said Quarrel, awestruck by the amount of money in his hand. He stowed it away inside his blue shirt and buttoned the shirt up to his neck. "Anything else?" "No, but take a lot of trouble about not being followed. Leave the car somewhere downtown and walk, and watch out particularly for any Chinese near you." Bond got up, and they went to the door. "See you tomorrow morning at 6:15, and we'll get over to the north coast. As far as I can see, that's going to be our base for a while." Half an hour later, Bond went downstairs and took a taxi to King's house. Pleydell Smith, the Colonial Secretary, was a youngish, shaggy-haired man with bright, boyish eyes. After pumping energetically at Bond's hand and waving him vaguely to a chair, he sat down opposite Bond and draped one leg over the arm of his chair. "What's your problem? Glad to help. I bet it's more interesting than this muck." He waved at the pile of papers in his in-tray. Bond grinned at him. He'd found an ally. "Well," he said seriously, "I'm here in the Strangways case. What I really wanted to talk to you about was Crab Key. Anything you know about the place, and about this Chinaman Dr. No who bought it, and anything you can tell me about his guano business." Pleydell Smith laughed shortly. "It's just a question of getting the file." He rang a bell. In a minute the door opened behind Bond. "Miss Taro, the file on Crab Key, please. The one on the sale of the place, and the other one on that warden fellow who turned up before Christmas." A soft voice said, "Yes, sir." Bond heard the door close behind him. "Where does this Crab Key business start?" Bond wanted to get down to cases. "Ah, yes," said Pleydell Smith. "At the beginning of the war, this Chinaman bought the island from us. Then he brought in labour and got to work. Been working it ever since. Must have made a fortune. He ships direct to Europe, to Antwerp. They send him a ship once a month. He runs that place like a fortress, sort of forced labour camp. No one ever gets off it. Of course it's his island, and he can do what he likes on it. Now," Pleydell Smith pressed the bell, "what the hell has happened to those files? You'll find all the dope you want in them." The door opened behind Bond. Pleydell Smith said irritably, "Really, Miss Taro, what about those files?" "Very sorry, sir," said the soft voice, "but we can't find them anywhere." "What do you mean, can't find them? Who had them last?" "Commander Strangway, sir." "Well, I remember distinctly him bringing them back to this room. What happened to them then?" "Can't say, sir." The voice was unemotional. "The covers are there, but there's nothing inside them." Bond turned in his chair. He glanced at the girl and turned back. He smiled grimly to himself. He knew where the files had gone. He also guessed how the particular significance of James Bond, import and export merchant, seemed to have leaked out of King's house, the only place where the significance was known. Like Dr. No, like the young lady photographer, the demure, efficient-looking little secretary in the horn-rimmed glasses was a Chinese. Bond and Quarrel were at the Saddleback at Stony Hill, where the junction road dives down through 50 S-bends towards the North Shore. Bond put the little Austin A30 into second gear and let it coast. The sun was coming up over the blue mountain, and dusty shafts of gold lanced into the plunging valley. Quarrel interrupted Bond's thoughts. "Captain," he said apologetically, "begging your pardon, but can you tell me what you have in mind for we? I've been puzzling, and I can't seem to figure out your game." "I've hardly figured it out myself, Quarrel." Bond changed up into top and dawdled through the cool, beautiful glades. "Right now, we're just going to hide out at the Bow Desert for a few days." "Then what, Captain?" "And then I was thinking you and me might go and take a look at Crab Key." Quarrel whistled. The whistle ended on a downward note. It seemed to Bond that they had been in the canoe forever. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3, 4. Quarrel stretched. He called softly to Bond. "I smells land, Captain." Soon there was a thickening of the darkness ahead. A pale moon rose slowly behind them. Now the island showed distinctly, a couple of miles away, and there was the distant grumble of surf. Now Bond, too, could smell the land. It had no particular scent. It was just something new in the nose after hours of clean sea. He could make out the white fringe of surf. The swell subsided, and the waves became choppier. Patches of sand showed deep under the boat. 100 yards inside the reef, breaking the sand line, was the shimmer of water running inland. The river. The wall of surf broke up. There was a turmoil of water and a series of grating thuds, and then a sudden rush forward into peace, and the canoe was moving slowly across a smooth mirror towards the shore. They made haste. Quarrel took 3 short lengths of thick bamboo out of the boat and laid them up the flat beach. They heaved the nose of the canoe onto the first and pushed the boat up the rollers. Slowly the canoe moved up the sand until at last it was over the black tide line. They pushed it another 20 yards inland into the beginning of the mangrove. It was still dark, but the breath of grey in the east would soon be turning to pearl. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. They were dead tired. Quarrel went off amongst the rocks on the promontory. Bond scooped out a depression in the fine, dry sand under a thick bush of sea grape. He lay down full length in the sand and rested his head on his arm. He was at once asleep. Bond awoke lazily. The feel of the sand reminded him where he was. He glanced at his watch. 10 o'clock. The sun through the round, thick leaves of the sea grape was already hot. Bond shifted his head and peered through the fringe of leaves and grass that concealed him from the beach. He stiffened. A larger shadow moved across the dappled sand in front of his face. His heart missed a beat, and then began pounding so that he had to breathe deeply to quieten it. His eyes, as he stared through the blades of grass, were fierce slits. It was a naked girl with her back to him. She was not quite naked. She wore a broad leather belt round her waist with a hunting knife in a leather sheath at her right hip. The belt made her nakedness extraordinarily erotic. She stood not more than 5 yards away on the tide line, looking down at something in her hand. She stood in the classical, relaxed pose of the nude, all the weight on the right leg and the left knee bent and turning slightly inwards, the head to one side as she examined the things in her hand. It was a beautiful back. The skin was a very light, uniform café au lait with a sheen of dull satin. The gentle curve of the backbone was deeply indented, suggesting more powerful muscles than is usual in a woman, and the behind was almost as firm and rounded as a boy's. The legs were straight and beautiful, and no pinkness showed under the slightly lifted left heel. She was not a coloured girl. Her hair was ash blonde. It was cut to the shoulders and hung there and along the side of her bent cheek in thick, wet strands. A green diving mask was pushed back above her forehead, and the green rubber thong bound her hair at the back. The whole scene, the empty beach, the green and blue sea, the naked girl with the strands of fair hair, reminded Bond of something. He searched his mind. Yes, she was Botticelli's Venus, seen from behind. She was whistling Mary Ann, a plaintive little calypso. It had always been one of Bond's favourite tunes. All day, all night, Mary Ann, sitting by the seaside sifting sand. The girl broke off to stretch her arms out in a deep yawn. Bond smiled to himself. He wet his lips and took up the refrain. The water from her eyes could sail a boat, the hair on her head could tie a goat. The hands flew down and across her chest. The muscles of her behind clenched with tension. She was listening, her head still hidden by the curtain of hair, cocked to one side. Hesitantly she began again. The whistle trembled and died. At the first note of Bond's echo, the girl whirled round. "Who's that?" The words came out in a terrified whisper. Bond got to his feet and stepped out through the sea grape. He stopped on the edge of the grass. He held his hands open at his sides to show they were empty. He smiled cheerfully at her. "It's only me. I'm another trespasser. Don't be frightened." The eyes examined him fiercely. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" There was the slight lilt of a Jamaican accent. The voice was sharp and accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm an Englishman. I'm interested in birds." "Oh?" The voice was doubtful. The hand still rested on the knife. "How long have you been watching me? How did you get here?" 10 minutes, but no more answers until you tell me who you are." "I'm no one in particular. I come from Jamaica. I collect shells." "I came in a canoe. Did you?" "Yes. Where is your canoe?" "I've got a friend with me. We've hidden it in the mangroves." "There are no marks of a canoe landing?" "We're careful. We covered them up, not like you." Bond gestured towards the rocks. "You ought to take more trouble." "Did you use a sail, right up to the reef?" "Of course. Why not? I always do." "Then they'll know you're here. They've got radar." "They've never caught me yet." The girl took her hand away from the knife. She reached up and stripped off the diving mask and stood swinging it. She seemed to think she had the measure of Bond. She said with some of the sharpness gone from her voice, "What's your name?" "Bond. James Bond. What's yours?" She reflected. "Ryder." "What Ryder?" "Honeychild." Bond smiled. "What's so funny about it?" "Nothing." "Honeychild Ryder. It's a pretty name." She unbent. "People call me Honey." "Well, I'm glad to meet you." The prosaic phrase seemed to remind her of her nakedness. She blushed. She said uncertainly, "I must get dressed." She looked down at the scattered shells around her feet. She obviously wanted to pick them up. Perhaps she realized that the movement might be still more revealing than her present pose. She said sharply, "You're not to touch those while I'm gone." Bond smiled at the childish challenge. "Don't worry. I'll look after them." The girl looked at him doubtfully, and then turned and walked stiff-legged over to the rocks and disappeared behind them. Bond walked the few steps down the beach and bent and picked up one of the shells. Was she really collecting them? It certainly looked like it. But what a risk to take to get them. The voyage alone over the strait in the canoe and then back again. And she seemed to realize that this was a dangerous place. "They've never caught me yet," she'd said. What an extraordinary girl. Bond's heart warmed and his senses stirred as he thought of her. Where did she live? There was something uncared for about her, like a puppy that nobody wants to pet. Who was she? Bond heard her footsteps riffling the sand. He turned to look at her. She was dressed almost in rags, a faded brown shirt with torn sleeves, and a knee-length patch-brown cotton skirt held in place by the leather belt with the knife. She had a canvas knapsack slung over one shoulder. She looked like a principal girl dressed as Man Friday. She at once went down on one knee and began picking up the shells and stowing them in her knapsack. Bond said, "Are those rare?" She sat back on her haunches and looked up at him. "You promise you won't tell anybody? Swear?" "I promise," said Bond. "Well then, yes, they are rare. Very. You can get $5 for a perfect specimen. In Miami. That's where I deal with. They're called Venus elegans, the elegant Venus." Her eyes sparkled up at him with excitement. "This morning, I found what I wanted, the bed where they live." She waved towards the sea. She stood up, her work completed. "What about these birds of yours? What sort are they? Are they valuable too?" "They're called roseate spoonbills," said Bond. "Sort of pink stork with a flat beak. Ever seen any?"
"Oh, those," she said scornfully. "There used to be thousands of them here, but you won't find many now. They scared them all away." She sat down on the sand and put her arms around her knees, proud of her superior knowledge, and now certain that she had nothing to fear from this man. Bond sat down a yard away. He stretched out and turned towards her, resting on his elbow. He wanted to preserve the picnic atmosphere and try to find out more about this queer, beautiful girl. He said easily, "Oh, really? What happened? Who did it?" She shrugged impatiently. "The people here did it. I don't know who they are. There's a Chinaman. He doesn't like birds or something. He's got a dragon. He sent the dragon after the birds and scared them away. The dragon burned up their nesting places. There used to be 2 men who lived with the birds and looked after them. They got scared away too, or killed, or something." It all seemed quite natural to her. She gave the facts indifferently, staring out to sea. Bond said, "This dragon, have you ever seen him?" "Yes, I've seen him." She screwed up her eyes and made a wry face as if she was swallowing bitter medicine. She looked earnestly at Bond to make him share her feelings. The girl leant sideways and peered at Bond's face. She sat up straight again and stared obstinately out to sea. "I can see you don't believe me," she said in a furious, tense voice. "You're one of these city people. You don't believe anything. Ugh!" She shuddered with dislike of him. Bond said reasonably, "Honey, there just aren't such things as dragons in the world. You saw something that looked very like a dragon. I'm just wondering what it was." "How do you know there aren't such things as dragons?" Now he'd made her really angry. "Nobody lives on this end of the island. One could easily have survived here. Anyway, what do you think you know about animals and things? I've lived with snakes and things since I was a child." Bond said, "Honey, now look here. I can't help it that I live in towns, but I do know that this Chinaman is going to be more interested in your visit this time. This time he's going to try and stop you getting away." He paused and added, "And me, for the matter of that." She turned and looked at him with interest. "Oh? Why? Is it you he's after?" "Well, yes," admitted Bond. "I'm afraid it is. You see, we dropped the sail about 2 miles out so that their radar wouldn't pick us up. I think the Chinaman may have been expecting a visit from me. Your sail will have been reported, and I'll bet anything he'll think your canoe was mine. I better go and wake my friend up and we'll talk it over. You'll like him. He's a Cayman Islander named of Quarrel." Bond got to his feet. He walked along the promontory and cast about him. Quarrel had hidden himself well. It took Bond 5 minutes to find him. He was lying in a grassy depression between 2 big rocks, half covered by a board of grey driftwood. He was still fast asleep, the brown head stern in sleep cradled on his forearm. Bond whistled softly and smiled as the eyes sprang wide open like an animal's. Quarrel saw Bond and scrambled to his feet almost guiltily. He rubbed his big hands over his face as if he was washing it. "Morning, Captain," he said. "Guess I've been down deep. That China girl come to me." Bond smiled. "I got something different," he said. They sat down and Bond told him about Honeychild Ryder and her shells and the fix they were in. "And now it's 11 o'clock, Bond added, "and we've got to make a new plan." Quarrel scratched his head. He looked sideways at Bond. "You don't plan we just ditch this girl?" he asked hopefully. "Ain't nothing to do with we." Suddenly he stopped. His head swiveled round and pointed like a dog's. He held up a hand for silence, listening intently. Bond held his breath. In the distance, to the eastwards, there was a faint droning. Quarrel jumped to his feet. "Quick, Captain," he said urgently. "There's a coming." 10 minutes later, the bay was empty and immaculate. The heap of discarded shells had gone, and there was no longer any trace of footprints. Quarrel had cut branches of mangrove and had walked backward, sweeping carefully as he went. The girl's canoe had been pulled deeper among the rocks and covered with seaweed and driftwood. Quarrel had gone back to the headland. Bond and the girl lay a few feet apart under the bush of sea grape where Bond had slept, and gazed silently out across the water to the corner of the headland round which the boat would come. The boat was perhaps a quarter of a mile away. From the slow pulse of the twin diesels, Bond guessed that every cranny of the coastline was being searched for signs of them. The boat appeared at the point of the headland. Bond's eyes went to the 2 men standing in the stern. They were pale-skinned Negroes. One of them was holding a long black loudhailer with a wire attached. The other was manning a machine gun on a tripod. The man with the loud hailer let it fall so that it swung on a strap round his neck. He picked up a pair of binoculars and began inching them along the beach. Bond watched the eyes of the binoculars begin with the headland and then sweep the sand. The scanner shouted something to the helmsman. The cabin cruiser stopped and backed up. Now she lay outside the reef exactly opposite Bond and the girl. Bond thought, now we've had it. These men know their job. Bond watched the machine gunner pull the bolt back to load. The double click came to him over the bubbling of the diesels. The scanner lifted his loud hailer and switched it on. "Okay, folks, come on out. You won't get hurt." It was an educated voice. There was a trace of American accent. Silence fell. The waves lapped softly on the beach. Bond could hear the girl breathing. The thin screeching of cormorants came to them muted across the mile of sea. The diesels bubbled unevenly as the swell covered the exhaust pipe and then opened it again. Softly Bond reached over to the girl and tugged at her sleeve. "Come close," he whispered. "Smaller target." He felt her warmth nearer to him. Her cheek brushed against his forearm. He whispered, "Burrow into the sand. Wriggle. Every inch'll help." He began to worm his body carefully deeper into the depression they had scooped out for themselves. He felt her do the same. The voice roared again. "Okay, folks, you've been warned. This is it." Bond watched the snout of the machine gun swing and depress. The man was going to start with the canoe among the rocks. Bond whispered to the girl, "All right, honey, stick it. Keep right down. It won't last long." He felt her hand squeeze his arm. He thought, poor little bitch, she's in this because of me. He leant to the right to cover her head and pushed his face deep into the sand. The crash of noise was terrific. The bullets howled into the corner of the headland. Fragments of splintered rock whined over the beach like hornets. Ricochets twanged and buzzed off into the hinterland. Behind it all there was the steady road drill hammer of the gun. There was a pause. New magazine, thought Bond. Now it's us. He could feel the girl clutching at him. Her body was trembling along his flank. Bond reached out an arm and pressed her to him. The roar of the gun began again. The bullets came zipping along the tide line towards them. There was a succession of quick, close thuds. The bush above them was being torn to shreds. It was as if the thong of a steel whip was cutting the bush to pieces. Bits scattered around them, slowly covering them. Bond could smell the cooler air that meant they were now lying in the open. Were they hidden by the leaves and debris? The bullets marched away along the shoreline. In less than a minute, the racket stopped. The silence sang. The girl whimpered softly. Bond hushed her and held her tighter. The loud hailer boomed. "Okay, folks, if you still got ears, we'll be along soon to pick up the bits. And we'll be bringing the dogs. Bye for now." Bond cautiously raised his head. The bay was serene, the beach unmarked. All was as before, except for the stench of cordite and the sour smell of blasted rock. Bond pulled the girl to her feet. There were tear streaks down her face. She looked at him aghast. She said angrily, "It's time you told me what all this is about. Why is everybody trying to kill each other, and who are you? I don't believe all this story about birds. You don't take a revolver after birds." Bond looked down into the angry, wide-apart eyes. "I'm sorry, honey. I'm afraid I've got you into a bit of a mess. I'll tell you all about it this evening when we get to the camp. It's just bad luck you being mixed up with me like this. I've got a bit of a war on with these people. They seem to want to kill me." They collected their kit and followed the river inland until it grew narrower and was only a stream between the bamboo clumps. Then it widened out into a flat, marshy estuary, beyond which the 5 square miles of shallow lake swept away to the other side of the island in a ruffled blue-grey mirror. Beyond there was the shimmer of the airstrip and the glint of the sun on a single hangar. The girl told them to keep to the east, and they worked their way slowly along inside the fringe of bushes. Slowly the day began to die, and at last the girl pointed ahead through the bushes, and Bond could see a long spit of sand running out into the lake. They reached the neck of the sand spit and filed out along a narrow track.
They came to the clearing with the smashed remains of the wattle hut. The big, mysterious tracks led out of the water on both sides and through the clearing and over the nearby bushes, as if the thing, whatever it was, had stampeded the place. Many of the bushes were burned or charred. There were the remains of a fireplace made of lumps of coral and a few scattered cooking pots and empty tins. Bond said, "As long as we don't show a light, we should be fine here for the night." The stars began to shine palely. The stars that had brought them to the island last night a year ago. The stars that would take them away again tomorrow night, a year away. What a trip. But at least it had already paid off. Now he had enough evidence and witnesses to go back to the governor and get a full-dress inquiry going on into the activities of Dr. No. Bond's thoughts were interrupted by a tug at his sleeve. The small voice said, "Why don't you go to sleep? Are you cold?" "No, I'm fine." "It's nice and warm in the sleeping bag you gave me. Would you like to come in? There's plenty of room." "No, thank you, honey. I'll be all right." There was a pause, then almost in a whisper, "If you're thinking, you don't have to make love to me. We could go to sleep back to front, like spoons." "Honey, darling, you go to sleep. It'd be lovely to be like that, but not tonight. Anyway, I'll have to take over the watch from Quarrel soon." "Yes, I see." The voice was grudging. "Perhaps when we get back to Jamaica." "Perhaps." "Promise. I won't go to sleep until you promise." Bond said desperately, "Of course I promise. Now go to sleep, honey child." The voice whispered triumphantly, "Now you owe me slave time. You've promised. Good night, James." "Good night, honey." The grip on Bond's shoulder was urgent. He was instantly on his feet. Quarrel whispered fiercely, "Something coming across the water, Captain. It's the dragon for sure." The girl woke up. She said anxiously, "What's happened?" Bond said, "Stay here, honey, don't move, I'll be back." He broke through the bushes on the side away from the mountain and ran along the sand with Quarrel at his elbow. They came to the tip of the sandspit, 20 yards from the clearing. They stopped under cover of the final bushes. Bond parted them and looked through. What was it? Half a mile away, coming across the lake, was a shapeless thing with 2 glaring orange eyes with black pupils. From behind these, where the mouth might be, fluttered a yard of blue flame. The grey luminescence of the stars showed some kind of domed head above the 2 short bat-like wings. The thing was making a low, moaning roar that overlaid another noise, a deep, rhythmic thud. It was coming towards them at about 10 miles an hour, throwing up a creamy wake. Quarrel whispered, "God, Captain, what's that fearful thing?" Bond stood up. He said shortly, "I don't know exactly. Some sort of tractor affair dressed up to frighten. It's running on a diesel engine, so you can forget about dragons. Now, let's see." Bond spoke half to himself. "No good running away. We'll have to fight it here. Quarrel, you start firing at that dome on top when it gets to 200 yards. Aim carefully and keep on firing. I'll go 50 yards along. They may start firing back, and we've got to keep the bullets away from the girl, okay?" He called softly, "Honey?" "Yes, James?" There was relief in the nearby voice. "Make a hole in the sand like we did on the beach, behind the thickest roots. Get into it and lie down. There may be some shooting. Don't worry about dragons. This is just a painted-up motor car with some of Dr. No's men in it. Don't be frightened. I'm quite close." "All right, James. Be careful." The voice was high with fright. Bond knelt on one knee in the leaves and sand and peered out. Now the thing was only about 300 yards away, and its yellow headlights were lighting up the sandspit. Blue flames were still fluttering from the mouth. They were coming from a long snout mocked up with gaping jaws and gold paint to look like a dragon's mouth. Flamethrower. That would explain the burned bushes and the warden's story. Bond had to admit that the thing was an awesome sight as it moaned forward through the shallow lake. It was obviously designed to terrify. It would have frightened him but for the earthy thud of the diesel. Against native intruders it would be devastating. But how vulnerable would it be to people with guns who didn't panic? Bond cradled the Smith & Wesson on his forearm and took careful aim. The deep cough of his gun sounded above the rattle of the engine. One of the headlamps shattered and went out. He fired 4 shots at the other and got it with the 5th and last round in the cylinder. The thing didn't care.
It rolled straight on towards Quarrel's hiding place. Bond reloaded and began firing at the huge bulge of the tires under the bogus black and gold wings. The range was now only 30 yards, and he could have sworn that he hit the nearest wheel again and again. No effect. Solid rubber. The first breath of fear stirred Bond's skin. He reloaded. Was the damn thing vulnerable from the rear? Should he dash out into the lake and try and board it? He took a step forward through the bushes. Then he froze, incapable of movement. Suddenly from the dribbling snout, a yellow-tipped bolt of blue flame had howled out towards Quarrel's hiding place. There was a single puff of orange and red flame from the bushes to Bond's right, and one unearthly scream immediately choked. Satisfied, the searing tongue of fire licked back into the snout. The thing turned on its axis and stopped dead. Now the blue hole of its mouth aimed straight at Bond. Bond stood and waited for his unspeakable end. He looked into the blue jaws of death and saw the glowing red filament of the firer deep inside the big tube. He thought of Quarrel's body. There was no time to think of Quarrel. And imagined the black, smoking figure lying in the melted sand. Soon he, too, would flame like a torch. The single scream would be wrung from him, and his limbs would jerk in the dancing pose of burned bodies. Then it would be Honey's turn. Christ, what had he led them into? Why had he been so insane as to take on this man with his devastating armory? Why hadn't he been warned by the long finger that had pointed at him in Jamaica? Bond set his teeth. Hurry up, you bastards, get it over. There came the twang of a loud hailer. A voice howled metallically, "Come on out, Limey, and the doll. Quick, or you'll fry in hell like your pal." To rub in the command, the bolt of flame spat briefly towards him. Bond stepped back from the searing heat. He felt the girl's body against his back. She said hysterically, "I had to come. I had to come." Bond said, "It's all right, honey. Keep behind me." He'd made up his mind. There was no alternative. Even if death was to come later, it couldn't be worse than this kind of death. Bond reached for the girl's hand and drew her after him out onto the sand. The voice howled, "Stop there! Good boy! And drop the pea-shooter. No tricks or the crabs will be getting cooked breakfast." Bond dropped his gun. The girl whimpered. Bond squeezed her hand. "Stick it, honey," he said. "We'll get out of this somehow." Bond sneered at himself for the lie. It was the sort of reception room the largest American corporations have on the president's floor in their New York skyscrapers. There were 2 women in the room. One of the women spoke to Bond and Honey. "I'm Sister Lily, and this is Sister Rose. You must be famished. Come along now, and I'll pack you both straight off to bed. You must be tired out." Bond and Honeychild were led along a great corridor where numbered doors led off on either side. Now the decor was in the lightest pink with a dove-grey carpet. The corridor came to an abrupt end with 2 doors side by side. It was like being shown into the very latest Florida hotel suite, except for 2 details which Bond noticed. Once they were inside the interconnecting rooms, there were no windows and no inside handles to the doors. Bond turned to Honeychild. He smiled at her. "It looks very comfortable, don't you think?" The girl nodded, not looking at him. The strangely courteous guards left them, saying, "And now we'll leave you in peace. If you want anything, just ring. The bells are by the bed. You'll find plenty of fresh clothes in the cupboards. The doctor has given strict orders that you're not to be disturbed. He'd be delighted if you'd join him for dinner this evening. Shall I say you—" "Yes, please," said Bond. "Tell the doctor we shall be delighted to join him for dinner." "Oh, I know he'll be so pleased." With a last twitter, the 2 women softly withdrew and closed the door behind them. In due course there came a soft knock on the door, and the 2 female guards conducted Bond and Honeychild, now bathed and dressed in kimonos, out of the room and along the empty, gracious corridor. They stopped at the lift. Its doors were held open by another eager Chinese girl. They walked in, and the doors shut. The lift sighed to a stop. Bond had no idea how far down they had gone, 100 feet, 200. The automatic doors hissed back, and Bond and the girl stepped out into a large room. It was empty. It was a high-ceilinged room about 60 feet long, lined on three sides with books to the ceiling. At first glance, the fourth wall seemed to be made of solid blue-black glass. The room appeared to be a combined study and library. Then Bond's eye caught a swirl of movement in the dark glass. He walked across the room. A silvery spray of small fish with a bigger fish in pursuit fled across the dark blue. They disappeared, so to speak, off the edge of the screen. What was this? An aquarium? Bond looked upwards. A yard below the ceiling, small waves were lapping at the glass. Above the waves was a strip of greyer blue-black, dotted with sparks of light. The outlines of Orion were the clue. This was not an aquarium. This was the sea itself, and the night sky. The whole of one side of the room was made of armored glass. They were under the sea, looking straight into its heart. Bond and the girl stood transfixed. What an amazing man this must be who had thought of this, and what an extraordinary engineering feat to have carried it out. How had he done it? There could only be one way. He must have built the glass wall deep inside the cliff, and then delicately removed layer after layer of the outside rock until the divers could prise off the last skin of coral. But how thick was the glass? Who had rolled it for him? How had he got it to the island? How many divers had he used? How much, God in heaven, could it have cost? $1 billion. It was a cavernous, echoing voice with a trace of American accent. Bond turned slowly, almost reluctantly, away from the window. Dr. No had come through a door behind his desk. He stood looking at them benignly, with a thin smile on his lips. I expect you were wondering about the cost. My guests usually think about the material side after about 15 minutes. Were you? I was. Still smiling, Bond was to get used to that thin smile. Dr. No came slowly out from behind the desk and moved towards them. He seemed to glide rather than take steps. His knees did not dent the matte gunmetal sheen of his kimono, and no shoes showed below the sweeping hem. Bond's first impression was of thinness and erectness and height. Dr. No was at least 6 inches taller than Bond, but the straight, immovable poise of his body made him seem still taller. The head also was elongated and tapered from a round, completely bald skull to a sharp chin, so that the impression was of a reversed raindrop, or rather oil drop, for the skin was of a deep, almost translucent yellow. It was impossible to tell Dr. No's age. As far as Bond could see, there were no lines on the face. It was odd to see a forehead as smooth as the top of the polished skull. Even the cavernous, indrawn cheeks below the prominent cheekbones looked as smooth as fine ivory. There was something Dali-esque about the eyebrows, which were fine and black and sharply upswept, as if they'd been painted on as make-up for a conjurer. Below them, slanting jet-black eyes stared out of the skull. They were without eyelashes. They looked like the mouths of 2 small revolvers, direct and unblinking and totally devoid of expression. The thin, fine nose ended very close above a wide, compressed wound of a mouth, which, despite its almost permanent sketch of a smile, showed only cruelty and authority. The chin was indrawn towards the neck. Later Bond was to notice that it rarely moved more than slightly away from center, giving the impression that the head and the vertebra were in one piece. The bizarre gliding figure looked like a giant venomous worm wrapped in grey tinfoil, and Bond would not have been surprised to see the rest of it trailing slimily along the carpet behind. Dr. No came within 3 steps of them and stopped. The wound in the tall face opened. "Forgive me for not shaking hands with you." The deep voice was flat and even. "I am unable to." Slowly the sleeves parted and opened. "I have no hands." The 2 pairs of steel pincers came out on their gleaming stalks and were held up for inspection like the hands of a praying mantis. Then the 2 sleeves joined again. Bond felt the girl at his side give a start. Dr. No moved to a high leather chair and folded himself down onto the seat. Bond took the chair opposite. The girl sat between them and slightly back. Bond felt a movement behind him. He looked over his shoulder. A short man, a Chinese Negro with the build of a wrestler, stood at the drink tray. He was dressed in black trousers and a smart white jacket. Black almond eyes in a wide moon face met his and slid incuriously away. Dr. No said, "This is my bodyguard. He is expert in many things. There is no mystery about his sudden appearance. I always carry what is known as a walkie-talkie. Here," he inclined his chin towards the bosom of his kimono. "Thus I can summon him when he is needed. What will the girl have?" Bond turned to Honeychild. Her eyes were wide and staring. She said quietly, "A Coca-Cola, please." Bond felt a moment of relief. At least she was not being got down by the performance. Bond said, "And I would like a medium vodka dry martini with a slice of lemon peel, shaken and not stirred, please. I would prefer Russian or Polish vodka." Dr. No gave his thin smile an extra crease. "I see you are also a man who knows what he wants. So be it. Sam, put the shaker beside the man, and a bottle of Coca-Cola beside the girl. We will have dinner at 9 o'clock precisely." Dr. No sat slightly more upright in his chair. He inclined himself forward, staring at Bond. There was a moment's silence in the room, and then Dr. No said, "And now, Mr. James Bond of the Secret Service, let us tell each other our secrets. First, to show you that I hide nothing, I will tell you mine. Then you will tell me yours." Dr. No's eyes blazed darkly. "But let us tell each other the truth. Do not waste your breath on these heroics. Nobody who comes to this island has ever left it. Do you understand? Nobody. Not even the simplest fisherman. It is not my policy. Do not argue with me, or attempt to bluff me. It is entirely useless." Bond shrugged his shoulders. He looked at the girl and smiled. He said, "Okay, honey, let's stay and listen to what the maniac has to say." Dr. No said in the same soft, resonant voice, "You are right, Mr. Bond. That is just what I am, a maniac. All the greatest men are maniacs. They are possessed by a mania which drives them forward towards their goal. I am a maniac, Mr. Bond, with a mania for power. That," the black holes glittered blankly at Bond through the contact lenses, "is the meaning of my life. That is why I am here. That is why you are here. That is why here exists." Bond picked up his glass and drained it. He filled it again from the shaker. He said, "I'm not surprised. It's the old business of thinking you're the King of England or the President of the United States or God. The asylums are full of them." A voice behind Bond said quietly, "Dinner is served." Dr. No put his cup softly down on its saucer. The eyes were hard and direct. The thin mouth creased and opened. "You have enjoyed your dinner, Mr. Bond." Bond took a cigarette from the silver box in front of him and lit it. He played with the silver table lighter. He smelled bad news coming. He must somehow pocket the lighter. Fire might perhaps be a weapon. He said easily, "Yes, it was excellent." Bond smoked busily, agitating his hands and forearms to create an atmosphere of movement. He folded his arms across his chest. The lighter was in his left armpit. He smiled cheerfully. "And what happens now, Dr. No? After your busy day with the bird dung, what comes next on your program?" "Ah, yes. You must have been wondering, Mr. Bond. Since you have only a few hours to live, I will tell you. There is more to this place than bird dung. Your instincts did not betray you." Dr. No paused for emphasis. "This island, Mr. Bond, is about to be developed into the most valuable technical intelligence center in the world." "Really?" Bond kept his eyes bent on his hands. "Doubtless you know that Turk's Island, about 300 miles from here through the Windward Passage, is the most important center for testing the guided missiles of the United States.
Perhaps you have read of the rockets that have been going astray recently. The multi-stage Snark, for instance, that ended its flight in the forests of Brazil instead of the depths of the South Atlantic.
Yes.
You recall that it refused to obey the telemetered instructions to change its course, even to destroy itself. It developed a will of its own.
I remember.
There have been other failures, decisive failures.
Dr. No could not keep a note of pride out of his voice.
It may interest you to know that the vast majority of those failures have been caused from Crab Key.
Is that so?
You do not believe me? No matter. Others do. Those others are the Russians. The Russians are my partners in this venture. They trained 6 of my men, Mr. Bond. 2 of those men are on watch at this moment, watching the radio frequencies, the beams on which these weapons travel. There is $1 million worth of equipment up above us in the rock galleries, Mr. Bond, waiting for the signals, countering the beams with other beams. Up in the stratosphere, the rocket acknowledges our signal, and we can speak to it and change its mind.
Dr. No paused.
Do you not find that interesting, Mr. Bond? This little sideline to my business in Guano. It is, I assure you, most profitable. It might be still more so. Perhaps Communist China will pay more. Who knows?
Bond looked into the 2 black holes with a new respect. He said, "You'll have to kill a lot more people to keep this thing in your hands, Dr. No. It's worth a lot of money. I wonder who will get to you first and kill you. Those men up there," he gestured towards the ceiling, "who were trained in Moscow, they're the technicians. I wonder what Moscow is telling them to do. You wouldn't know that, would you?" Dr. No said,
You cannot play for high stakes without taking risks, Mr. Bond. I accept the dangers, and so, as I can, I have equipped myself against them. Directly I found they were looking for me, I would have one last fling. Their rockets would go mad. They would land on Havana, on Kingston. They would turn round and home on Miami. And then what? There would be a panic, a public outcry. The experiments would have to cease. The Turks Island base would have to close down. And how much would Russia pay for that to happen, Mr. Bond? And how much for each of the prototypes I captured from them? Shall we say $10 billion for the whole operation? 20 billion?
The bitterness inside Bond came up into his mouth so that for a moment he thought he was going to retch. "All right, Dr. No. Now let's get on with the cabaret. What's the program? Knife, bullet, poison, rope? But make it quick, I've seen enough of you." Dr. No's lips compressed into a thin purple line. The eyes were hard as onyx under the billiard-ball forehead and skull. He spoke a word, and the 2 guards took a step forward and held the 2 victims above the elbows, forcing their arms back against the sides of their chairs. There was no resistance. Bond concentrated on holding the lighter in his armpit. The girl's eyes in the pale face were blue-black with fear. Her lips trembled. She said, "Will it hurt?"
"Silence!"
Dr. No's voice was the crack of a whip.
"Enough of this foolery. Of course it will hurt. I am interested in pain. From time to time I make experiments on those of my people who have to be punished. I shall record the length of your endurance. The facts will be noted. One day my findings will be given to the world. Your deaths will have served the purposes of science. It is a year since I put a girl to death in the fashion I have chosen for you, woman. She was a negress. She lasted 3 hours. She died of terror. I have wanted a white girl for comparison."
Dr. No sat back in his chair. His eyes were now fixed on the girl, watching her reactions.
"You are a Jamaican, so you will know what I am talking about. This island is called Crab Key. It is called by that name because it is infested with crabs. They weigh about £1 pound each, and they are as big as saucers. At this time of year, they come up in thousands from their holes near the shore and climb up towards the mountain. They march up in armies of hundreds at a time. They march through everything and over everything. The crabs devour what they find in their path, and tonight, in the middle of their path, they are going to find the naked body of a woman pegged out, a banquet spread for them, and they will feel the warm body with their feeding pincers, and one will make the first incision with his fighting claws, and then... There was a moan from the girl. Her head fell forward slackly onto her chest. She had fainted. Dr. No spoke a sentence in Chinese. The guard behind the girl's chair leant forward and plucked her bodily out of the chair as if she had been a child, and slung the inert body over his shoulder. Between the dangling arms the hair fell down in a golden shower. The guard went to the door and opened it and went out, closing it noiselessly behind him. Dr. No said quietly, "Let us proceed to the method of your departure. That also has its novel aspects. You see, Mr. Bond, I'm interested in the anatomy of courage, in the power of the human body to endure. But how to measure human endurance? I have prepared you for the experiment as best I could. I gave you a sedative so that your body should be rested, and I have fed you well so that you may be at full strength." Dr. No paused, watching Bond's face. "You see, Mr. Bond, I have just finished constructing an obstacle race, an assault course against death. I will say no more about it, because the element of surprise is one of the constituents of fear. And I flatter myself that the gauntlet you will run contains a rich assortment of the unexpected. You should go far, but when, as is inevitable, you have finally failed at an obstacle, your body will be recovered, and I shall most meticulously examine the physical state of your remains. Run a good race for me, Mr. Bond. My thoughts, as they say, will be with you." Dr. No turned away, and the door closed softly behind the long, thin gunmetal back. The liftman stood in front of the buttons, so that Bond could not see which he had pressed. They were going up. Bond tried to estimate the distance. The lift sighed to a stop. The doors opened onto an uncarpeted corridor with rough grey paint on the stone walls. It ran about 20 yards straight ahead. They came to the end door. It was marked with a black Q. It was ajar, and the guard pushed Bond into the door so that it swung open. Through the door was a grey-painted stone cell about 15 feet square. There was nothing in it except a wooden chair, on which lay, laundered and neatly folded, Bond's black canvas jeans and his blue shirt. Bond looked round the cell. The walls were entirely naked, except for a ventilation grill of thick wire in one corner just below the ceiling. It was wider than his shoulders. It was obviously the way out into the assault course. Outside, somewhere on the slope of the mountain, the girl would already be lying, waiting for the rattle of claws on the grey coral. Bond clenched his teeth at the thought of the pale body, spread-eagled, out there under the stars. Abruptly he stood up. What the hell was he doing sitting still? Whatever lay on the other side of the wire grill, it was time to go. Bond threw off the kimono, dressed in the trousers and shirt, and stowed the lighter in his hip pocket. Bond set the chair below the grill and climbed onto it. His fingers went through the wire of the grill and gripped. The next thing he knew was a searing pain up his arm and the crack of his head hitting the stone floor. He lay stunned, with only the memory of a blue flash and the hiss and crackle of electricity to tell him what had hit him. He went back to the chair and climbed up again and reached, nervously, for the edge of the ventilator shaft. This time there was no shock. Bond heaved up and through the opening and lay on his stomach, looking along the shaft. The shaft stretched straight ahead, featureless, except for the ridges where the section of pipe joined. Bond snaked forward. It was easy going. Cool air from the ventilating system blew strongly in Bond's face. There was a faint luminosity ahead. It grew brighter. It was the glint of light against the end of the lateral shaft. He went on until his head touched the metal. He twisted over on his back. Straight above him, at the top of 50 yards or so of vertical shaft, was a steady glimmer. It was like looking up a long gun barrel. Bond inched round the square bend and stood upright.
So he was supposed to climb straight up this shining tube of metal without a foothold. Was it possible? Bond expanded his shoulders. 6 inches at a time, Bond's body began to worm up the shaft. Expand shoulders to grip the sides, lift feet, lock knees, force the feet outwards against the metal, and as the feet slipped downwards with his weight, contract shoulders and raise them a few inches higher. Above him light was shining through a thick porthole. All he had to do was inch himself round and grip the edge of the new shaft and somehow gather enough strength to heave himself in. Then he would be able to lie down. With an extra delicacy, born of panic that something might now go wrong, that he might make a mistake and plummet back down the shaft to land in a crackle of bone, Bond, his breath steaming against the metal, carried out the maneuver, and with his last ounce of strength, jackknifed into the opening and crumpled full length on his face. Later, how much later, Bond's eyes opened and his body stirred. Ahead in the darkness there were tiny red pinpoints of light. Bond screwed up his eyes and shook his head. No, they were still there. Slowly he snaked down. Bond reached for the lighter. He held his breath as he lit the little yellow flame. The red pinpoints went out. Instead, a yard ahead of him, a very narrow mesh wire blocked the shaft. Bond, listening, could hear tiny scuffling coming back towards him, and gradually the forest of red pinpoints gathered again, peering at him through the mesh. Bond doused the light to save fuel, and let the breath come through his teeth in a quiet sigh. They were spiders, giant tarantulas, 3 or 4 inches long. There were dozens of them in the cage, and somehow he had to get past them. But Bond had a lighter. All he needed was the nerve and infinite, infinite precision. Bond softly opened the jaws of the lighter and lit it, and as the spiders scuttled back, he broke through the thin wire mesh and snaked through the opening. The spiders cowered before the flame of the lighter and crowded back on top of each other. Bond gathered himself and shot his body over the pile of invertebrates and through the jagged frame. He had no idea what bits of metal he touched or whether he had put his knee or foot among the spiders. All he knew was that he had got through. Bond tensed his muscles. It was time to go. With extra care, he painfully began to drag himself on into the blackness. The shaft was beginning to slope gently downwards. It made the going easier. Soon the slope grew steeper, so that Bond could almost slide along under the momentum of his weight. It was a blessed relief not to have to make the effort with his muscles. Suddenly, Bond realized that he was slipping down the shaft. He opened his shoulders and spread his feet to slow himself. It hurt, and the braking effect was small. Now the shaft was widening. He could no longer get a grip. He was going faster and faster. A bend was just ahead, and it was a bend downwards. Head first, Bond's body shot out of the shaft and fell through the air, slowly, slowly down towards the gunmetal sea that waited for him 100 feet below. He lost consciousness, but the 40-mile-an-hour impact with the water failed to smash him. Slowly the body rose to the surface and lay head down, softly rocking in the ripples of the dive. Coughing horribly, the head jerked above the surface and stayed there, and through the red-black curtain the bloodshot eyes saw the lifeline and told the sluggish brain to make for it. The lifeline towards which Bond struggled was a narrow rocky track made by the feet of the workers. It led down the side and round the bulge of the cliff. From close by came various sounds and echoes. A crane was working. He could hear the changing beat of its engine. There were iron ship noises and the sound of water splashing into the sea from a bilge pump. Bond, leaving drops of blood behind him, picked his way carefully along the track. Bond flattened himself against the rock and warily inched his head round the corner. Bond took one long, comprehensive look and pulled back. Round the corner, not more than 10 yards away, was the crane. There was no back to the cabin. Inside it a man sat at the controls. It was the Chinese Negro boss, the driver of the marsh buggy. In front of him the jetty ran 20 yards out into the sea and ended in a T. An aged tanker of around 10,000 tons deadweight was secured alongside the top of the T. It stood well out of the water, its decks perhaps 12 feet above the quay. There was no sign of life on board except one figure lolling at the wheel in the enclosed bridge. From just to the right of the crane, an overhead conveyor belt in a corrugated iron housing ran out from the cliff face. It was carried on high stanchions above the jetty and stopped just short of the hold of the tanker. Its mouth ended in a huge canvas sock, perhaps 6 feet in diameter. From out of the mouth of the sock, in a solid downward jet, the scrambled egg-coloured guano dust was pouring into the hold of the tanker at a rate of tons a minute. Below, on the jetty, to the left and to leeward of the drifting smoke of the guano dust, stood the tall, watchful figure of Dr. No. That was all. There was no other sound, no other movement, no other life apart from the watch at the ship's wheel, the trusty working at the crane, and Dr. No, seeing that all went well. Bond stepped up to the rock and inched an eye round. Nothing had changed. His guess at the distances had been right. The crane driver was watchful, absorbed. The neck above the open khaki shirt was naked, offered, waiting. 20 yards away, Dr. No, also with his back to Bond, stood sentry over the thick, rich cataract of whitey-yellow dust. On the bridge, the watch was lighting a cigarette. Bond looked along the 10 yards of path that led past the back of the crane. He picked out the places he would put each foot. Then he came out from behind the rock and ran. Bond ran to the right of the crane. He got there and stopped, crouching, listening. The 2 iron footholds at the back of the cabin, inches away from Bond's face, looked solid. But he would have to be quick to yank the man's body out of the seat and get his own hands and feet on the controls. The single blow from the heel of his hand would have to be mortal. For a final second he listened, then went up the iron steps and into the cabin with the stealth and speed of a panther. At the last moment there was no need to hurry. Bond stood behind the man's back, smelling him. He had time to raise his hand almost to the roof of the cabin, time to summon every ounce of strength before he swept it down and onto the smooth, brownish-yellow skin. The man's hands and legs splayed away from the controls. No noise came from the open mouth, and the big body rolled sideways off its iron seat and crashed to the floor. He was already in the seat and reaching for the pedals and levers. Bond reached forward for the iron wheel which the driver had been handling when Bond had caught his first glimpse of him. Bond's eyes flashed to the jetty. Dr. No had moved, a few paces to a stanchion that Bond had missed. He had a telephone in his hand. Bond whirled the director wheel. Christ, wouldn't it turn any faster? Now the mouth of the conveyor was spewing the dust column down over the side of the ship. Now the yellow mound was marching silently across the jetty. 5 years. 4, 3, 2. Don't look round, you bastard. Ah, got you. Stop the wheel. Now you take it, Dr. No. At the first brush of the stinking dust column, Dr. No had turned. Bond saw the long arms fling wide as if to embrace the thudding mass. One knee rose to run, the mouth opened, and a thin scream came up to Bond above the noise of the engine, and then only a mound of yellow bird dung that grew higher and higher. Bond slipped off the iron seat and bent over the inert body. He took the revolver out of the holster and looked at it. He slipped it down inside his waistband. It was fine to feel the heavy cold metal against his skin. He went to the door of the cabin and dropped down onto the ground. An iron ladder ran up the cliff behind the crane to where the conveyor housing jutted out. There was a small door in the corrugated iron wall of the housing. The door opened easily, letting out a puff of guano dust, and he clambered through. There were dim inspection lights in the stone ceiling of the tunnel, and a narrow catwalk that stretched away into the mountain alongside the hurrying river of dust. Bond half ran and half stumbled through the echoing, stinking tunnel. When Bond's head hit into the soft stomach, he felt the hands at his throat. It was too late to think of his revolver. His only reaction was to throw himself down and forward at the legs. The legs gave against his shoulder, and there was a shrill scream as the body crashed down on his back. Bond had started the heave that would hurl his attacker sideways and onto the conveyor belt when the quality of the scream and something light and soft about the impact of the body froze his muscles. He shouted, "Honey, honey, it's me." Through the din of the conveyor belt, Bond's shout got through to her. He heard her cry, "James!" from somewhere near the floor. He felt her hands clutch at his legs. "James! James!" Bond slowly let her down. He turned and knelt and reached for her. He put his arms round her and held her tightly to him. "Oh, honey, honey, are you all right?" "Yes, James. Oh, yes." He felt her hands at his back and his hair. "Oh, James, my darling." She fell against him, sobbing.
"It's all right, honey." Bond smoothed her hair. "And Dr. No's dead. But now we've got to run for it." Bond pulled the girl to her feet. She was wearing a dirty suit of workman's blue dungarees. The sleeves and legs were rolled up. The suit was far too big for her. She looked like a girl in a man's pyjamas. She said breathlessly, "Just up there. There's a side tunnel that leads to the machine shop and the garage. Will they come after us?" There was no time to talk. Bond said urgently, "Follow me," and started running. Behind him her feet padded softly in the hollow silence. They came to the fork where the side tunnel led off into the rock. The sound of voices booming far up the side tunnel reached them. Bond drew the girl a few feet in the main tunnel. He brought her close to him and felt for his gun. The voices were coming closer. Now they were very close. He could hear the shoes scuffling on the ground. "I'm going to cut myself a slice of the white girl," Bond said sharply. "No, you won't." The three men whirled round. White teeth glinted in open mouths. The echoes thundered slowly up and down the tunnel. A puff of fine dust rose in the air and settled. Two of the bodies lay still. The man with the stomach shot writhed and jerked. Bond tucked his hot gun into the waistband of his trousers. He said roughly to the girl, "Come on!" He reached for her hand and pulled her after him into the mouth of the side tunnel. The dim yellow bulbs in the ceiling flicked by overhead. Still the tunnel stretched on. Behind him Honey stumbled. Bond stopped, cursing himself for not having thought of her. She reached for him and Bond put his arm round her waist and took her weight. They started moving again, and almost immediately she whispered urgently, and there was a wooden door in the wall of the tunnel, and it was ajar, and no sound came from the other side. Bond took out his gun and gently eased the door open. The long garage was empty. Under the neon lights, the black and gold-painted dragon on wheels looked like a float waiting for the Lord Mayor's show. It was pointing towards the sliding doors, and the hatch of the armoured cabin stood open. Bond prayed that the tank was full and that the mechanic had carried out his orders to get the damage fixed. Softly, Bond closed the tunnel door and locked and bolted it. He went to the arms rack on the wall and chose a Smith & Wesson and a Remington carbine and handed them in to the girl. Now the entrance door. Bond put his shoulder to it and softly eased it wide open. The corrugated iron rumbled hollowly. Bond ran back and scrambled through the open hatch and into the driver's seat. "Shut it, honey," he whispered urgently, and bent and turned the ignition key. "Anyone after us?" Bond had to shout above the noise of the diesel. "Close the slot. Lie down on the floor." Bond glanced at the speedometer. 20, and they were on a slope. There was nothing more to get out of the machine. Bond concentrated on keeping the huge bucking wheels on the track. Good. "Take a look, honey. Open the slot an inch." "They're all looking after us, a whole crowd of them. Wait, there's something else. The dogs are coming. They're just tearing down the track after us." "Come and sit by me, honey. Hold tight. Mind your head against the roof." Bond felt her hand at his neck. She kept it there as they swayed and thundered down the track. At the lake, Bond reached down for the rifle and pushed it through the aperture. Now the dogs were in the water and swimming. Bond kept his finger on the trigger and sprayed bullets into the middle of them. They were milling around in the frothing, bloody water. Bond emptied his magazine among them and dropped the gun on the floor. He said, "That's that, honey," and put the machine into gear and swung it round and began rolling at an easy speed across the shallow lake towards the distant gap in the mangroves that was the mouth of the river. Bond put a hand on the girl's knee and said, "We should be all right now, honey. When they find the boss is dead, there'll be panic. They'll worry about their skins, not about us. We should be at the coast in an hour. Then we'll rest up and try and get in shape for the trip. Think you can make it? Tell me what happened to you last night. How in hell did you manage to get away from the crabs? All night long I could only think of you out there being slowly eaten to death." The girl was actually laughing. "That man thought he knew everything. He's much more impressed by the black crabs than I am. To begin with, I don't mind any animal touching me, and anyway those crabs wouldn't think of even nipping someone if they stay quite still and haven't got an open sore or anything. The whole point is that they don't really like meat. If he was right and he did kill a black girl that way, either she had an open wound or she must have died of fright." "Well, I'm damned. I wish to heaven I'd known that. I thought of you being picked to pieces." The girl snorted. "It wasn't very comfortable out there on the rock. Then I heard the crabs scurrying and rattling along, hundreds of them. They walked round me and over me. I might have been a rock for all they cared. And I just waited for the early morning when they crawl into holes and go to sleep. Then they got fewer and fewer and finally stopped coming and I could move. I pulled at all the pegs in turn and then concentrated on my right-hand one. In the end I got it out of the crack in the rock and the rest was easy. I got back to the building and began scouting about. I found the door in the back of the machine shop and walked through and into the main tunnel. That's all."
Bond reached out and caught her by the hair and pulled her face to him. Her mouth felt its way round his cheek and locked itself against his. The machine gave a sideways lurch. The kiss ended. They had hit the first mangrove roots at the entrance to the river. The night voyage under the stars had been without incident. No one had come after them. The girl had done most of the sailing. Bond had not argued with her. He had lain in the bottom of the boat, totally collapsed like a dead man. He had woken once or twice and listened to the slap of the sea against the hull and watched her quiet profile under the stars. The girl had brought the canoe through under sail. They slid across the bay to the little fringe of sand, and the bows under Bond's head sighed softly into it. She had to help him out of the boat and across the velvet lawn and into the house. Now Bond swung the little car down the endless S-bends towards the north shore. Bond's bedroom was cool and dark. There was a plate of sandwiches and a thermos full of coffee beside the turned-down bed. On the pillow was a sheet of paper with big childish writing. "You owe me slave time. I will come at 7. Your H." In the dusk she came to his room. She was wearing a black and white striped cotton skirt and a tight sugar-pink blouse. The golden hair smelled of shampoo. She looked incredibly fresh and beautiful. She reached out her hand and Bond took it. He took her in his arms and kissed her hard on the lips. Her eyes were wide and dark. She'd gone pale. She dropped her eyes and looked at his mouth. Slowly she pulled his head towards her. Bond put out a hand to her left breast and held it hard. Their mouths met and clung, exploring. A moth had come in through one of the windows. It whirred round the bedside light. The girl's closed eyes opened, looked at the moth. Her mouth drew away. She smoothed the handful of his hair back and got up, and without saying anything, turned the light out. The moth whirred away through one of the windows. The girl undid her blouse and threw it on the floor, then her skirt. Under the glint of moonlight she was a pale figure with a central shadow. She came to Bond and took him by the hand and lifted him up. She undid his shirt and slowly, carefully took it off. Her body close to him smelled of new-mown hay and sweet pepper. She led him to the bed, which was turned down, its mouth laid open. The girl let go his hand and climbed into bed. She looked up at him. She said, practically, "Take those off and come in. You promised. You owe me slave time. But do as you're told."